So very nice. I can't really see you, but I know you're there. So very nice to know that you're there. And I hope you're all well in this weird and interminable extended bardo, really, that we seem to be in, of not quite knowing where we are. Of course, from a dharmic perspective, this unknowing, this not knowing, can be useful, but from a lived life perspective, sometimes it's just a pain, isn't it? But I'm hoping that you're getting moments of freedom, moments of relief. Certainly yesterday, moments of beauty. It snowed where I am in East London, and it's exquisite. The park near where the Buddhist Centre is was just turned into magic for just a few hours. Very, very lovely. So, yes, I hope you're well, and I hope that this meditation, 21-day meditation challenge is enriching your life, whatever else is going on. So, Jnanavaca talked about, this is the fourth Monday evening of this challenge. And on the first one, I talked about, we called it the transcendental context for meditation. I was trying to point out that from a dharmic perspective, from a Buddhist perspective, meditation is part of a much larger path, much larger adventure, which culminates in enlightenment. And I was trying to set the sort of biggest context. And then Jnanavaca talked about what does that mean in our everyday life, and particularly she talked about ethics. And then Surya-Gupta talked about engaging with the world through compassion, through love. Because Buddhism can't just be about me working on my mind or you working on your mind. The vision of the Dharma is more than that. It includes us collectively bringing more light into the world, doing what we can to help transform the world. The Buddha did that primarily through helping other people on the path to enlightenment, helping them wake up to the way things really are. And that's what this Buddhist Centre exists for, primarily, is to help people who want to move towards enlightenment. It's that which really the world needs. Of course, the world needs lots of other things, doesn't it? I mean, it's a mad world in so many ways. But one of the things that I think goes, it sort of goes underground. You know, you don't read about the need for enlightenment in the news. You read about the food banks, the need for people's basic security and survival. And of course, that's, horribly, tragically important. You read about people's mental, increasingly you read about their mental health needs and wellness needs, and that's all really, really important as well. But you seldom read about the deepest need that all human beings have, which is an existential need for meaning and for, in a way, fulfilling their real potential. Not just in terms of the externals like career and whatever, but fulfilling the potential of mind, of consciousness. Because consciousness has potential, or our minds have potential. And if we don't sort of move towards realizing them, there's a certain level of emptiness, a certain level of sort of, I don't mean emptiness in the Buddhist sense, I mean emptiness in the sense of hollowness. There's a certain sense of lack that is always there, but often it's subconscious. It sort of goes underground. I mean, for me, I think that was there from boyhood. I can remember coming across a school project that I did where I was questioning the meaning of life. And I think I was probably about 9 or so. I'm not completely sure. And questioning why we do it. Why we bother, and what death is, and do we come back, and have we been here before? All of these questions in this. I guess I must have been. I think I was happy, but reading this project, it makes me feel like an angst-ridden little boy. But I think I was happy. And then when my dad died, I was 11, and difficult though that was, obviously difficult, painful though it was, one of the consequences of that for me was that I sort of discovered for myself that death isn't the end. And I think each of us has to make that discovery for ourselves. You can do that in various ways. For me, it wasn't meditation, although meditation can lead you there. For me, it was trying to psychically communicate with my father. I used to do that through a pack of playing cards, asking questions of the deck, etc., and getting answers. And there were too many coincidences for me to doubt that death wasn't the end and that I was in touch with him. I was recently watching that Netflix documentary, Surviving Death, which I've been pointing people to. And so many of the sort of experiences that some of those programs talk about of communication with people who have died, they happened for me when I was 11 and in the years afterwards. And what that confirmed for me was not just that death wasn't the end, which I fully accepted, but it raised the question of then what was life for? Why was I here? Because I couldn't articulate it, but it felt like if death wasn't the end, then life has a meaning, has a purpose, a goal, that we've taken birth in this human form in order to do something. And I didn't know what that something was, but I knew that it couldn't be career and house and home and holidays abroad. We didn't have mobile phones in those days, but the equivalent would have been, I don't know what it would have been. But anyway, it couldn't be for those transient, rather ephemeral things. And I knew that in that precocious way that young people do sometimes. And adolescents often, adolescents get quite grumpy, don't they, a lot of the time. But underneath their sort of grumpiness, there's a certain wisdom sometimes where they're seeing that the way that adults are living their lives are meaningless, are sort of rubbish. And most adolescents probably vow to themselves somewhere that they won't become like them, that they won't become like their parents. Well, I think I was a bit like that. And I was fortunate enough to come across the Dharma that kept my life on that quest, because I think that quest goes underground for many, many people. And our culture, our world around us, all the advertising tells us not to worry about that existential quest of what we're here for. Just get on with trying to be happy. And happy normally means getting what we want. And it's such a lie, because I think what happens is that people have breakdowns, they have crises. I saw that in my career. I worked in corporate kind of IT world, and one day a woman that I wasn't closely working with, but she was a senior manager in another department that I was doing a project with, and she just stopped coming to work, and I really liked her. I mean, she was probably, I don't know how old she was. I was in my 20s, she was probably in her 40s or something. She just stopped coming to work. And later on I found out that she'd had a breakdown. And it came as a bit of a wake-up call for me, because she looked really happy, she was really successful, etc., etc. And I'd seen her the week before and had a meeting with her about work. And kind of made me realise, look, that was a front. She was putting on a front, a show, a brave face. And also that most people in the environment I worked were doing that. And I kind of thought, I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. I am not going to do that. Anyway, so that led me to the Dharma. And so I came to Buddhism wanting to know what the meaning of life was, and not just wanting to become a bit happier in my life. I was prepared, not all in one go, but to change my life in order to find its true meaning. And of course I'm still on that quest, and it's not that I've got a pat answer for you, but I do know that the meaning of our existence has something to do with our minds, with consciousness, and with an exploration of the deepest structure of our mind, and of growth of our mind, of consciousness, that somehow, and that growth means awareness and love. I mean, it means other things as well. It means freedom and bliss and fearlessness and energy and creativity and connection. But you know, you could, if you wanted to put it down to two words, it's awareness and love. That seems to me, I know it's sort of possibly glib, but that feels to me why we're here. And all the other stuff is stuff that you have to do along the way or something. And I don't mean just awareness and love in an ordinary sense. I mean in the sense of transcendental awareness and transcendental love. Something beyond the distinction of self and other, beyond the dualistic nature of how we perceive the world. So that's what I'm drawn to in my life. And my although I'm not there yet, although I don't abide in that deepest non-dual consciousness, I know that it's true because I've had enough glimpses of it. And once you've had a taste of it, it's like nothing else compares. Nothing else compares in life. It is the only thing. It's truth itself. So everything else is sort of has a relationship to it, but it's not the truth. So that's a way of a preamble. I want to talk now a little bit more about what Buddhism says about mind, well, about consciousness. Actually, I ought to be clear about my terms. I'm going to use consciousness, because that's what the title of the talk is, for what I want to talk about, the nature of consciousness. And I'll reserve the word mind for something else, which hopefully will become a bit clearer. So the first thing to say, and I'm going to be using some notes from some rambles that Subhuti gave. So I want to sort of try and see. I won't be able to do it justice because I haven't got time, but I'm going to be basing what I say on some things that he said some years ago. And consciousness can't be defined. It can't be defined because it's not a thing. It's not a noun. Although we give it a name, because we have to talk about it, to give it a name is to falsify it. Because consciousness is the faculty that knows the world, that apprehends the world. The world that it apprehends then consists of things which are nouns, but consciousness, this faculty that knows, is a knowing. It's not a thing. It can't. You can't know the knowing in the same way as you can know a table. You can't sort of turn the lens back on itself. It's the lens, if you see what I mean. Nor, according to Buddhism, is consciousness static. There are different models, but one model is that it arises afresh moment to moment in every instant. consciousness arises afresh, and it apprehends afresh. So it arises and perceives or apprehends through the senses, our five senses, the phenomena of the world, moment to moment. Actually, in Buddhism, it's more than five senses because, and this is where I'm going to use the word mind rather than consciousness, mind is a sense as well. By mind, I mean all the content of our mind, thoughts, images, memories, emotions, volitions, desires, all of those things that we see as the content of our inner world. I'm going to call that mind. And then you've got these other senses of sight, what are the other senses? Smell, taste, touch, and what's the fifth one? Hearing. Well done. I've got a crew here that can help me at such difficult moments. I don't know how I'm going to talk about the deeper levels of mind when I can't remember the senses. But anyway, there's those five, as it were, external senses, which each have a way of apprehending the world. And then there's mind as the sixth sense in Buddhism, which has its own sense objects, like images, like thoughts, like volitions, like desires and emotions, etc., etc. And so this model, one model says that all of those six consciousnesses are momentary. They're arising moment to moment. They're arising moment to moment. Actually, Subhuti points out that that's only a way of talking and that it's not really true. That actually consciousness, whatever it is, isn't in time at all. Isn't in time at all, nor in space. So to say that it arises moment to moment is to sort of falsify it, but it's a way of talking that at least is better than saying it's a fixed thing. Because how can we talk about something that's not in time and space? So we're making concessions to language and to ordinary ways of thinking when we say that it's momentary. But that's a better way of thinking than to fix it, because to fix it, we're more likely to turn it into a thing, and it's not a thing. Ian McGilchrist, this psychiatrist and writer that Maitrabandha and I were interviewing, sort of talks about how there's nothing else to compare consciousness with in the world. When I compare, when we talk about another sense object like a dog, you can compare the dog to a wolf, you can contrast it with a cat and other mammals or other animals. You can sort of, that's how we know things. We compare them to each other. Sometimes we get that wrong, but that's how but consciousness isn't in the same category as this world of things. So we've got nothing to define it by. There's no way of talking about that which knows. Not really. But anyway, according to this model of the Yogachara was a later Buddhist school that emerged from yogis, i.e. meditators, looking into the depths of their own mind and looking, sort of introspecting, trying to introspect to see what is the structure of consciousness. What's the structure? Normally, we're very concerned about the content of one's mind. So if I have a happy thought, I'm happy. If I have a sad thought, I'm sad. If I taste something really tasty, pleasurable, then that's really lovely, and so forth. And basically, of course, life is more complicated than just having nice things to eat. But basically our world is often working at that level, finding pleasurable sensations for those six senses, or contriving our lives, controlling our lives and our world as much as we can, so that we can maximize those sense pleasures. Yeah, but we're seldom concerned with looking at the structure of consciousness. What is it to have a thought? What is a thought? Not worrying so much about the content of the thought, but thought itself. What is it to have an image? Well, anyway, these Buddhist yogis in Kashmir in, I don't know what century, but probably about 500 years after the Buddha's passing away, they formed a sort of psychology of the structure of mind. I don't know if that's a psychology or not, but yes, a sort of a model, and it was called the yogachara, which is the way, chara is way of yogic development, of mental development. So it's a sort of model, and in that model there are three kind of levels. I mean, this is a really simplified, really simplified. I'm not a yogachara expert, and I'm just going on some of Subhuti's simplifications. So this is very simplified, but there are three levels to the structure of consciousness. And the top level is the ordinary world that I've just talked about, of the six senses. So those six senses in this model of the yogachara are six different types of consciousness that apprehend the world. That's not quite true, actually. What happens is that they form images, they form sense impressions. So there are sights and sounds and tastes and smells and touches that are felt. And the mind sense sort of brings all of those sense impressions together to create a sort of unified image of the world. Something has to sort of bring it together. So if you see a table and touch it at the same time, according to this model, you've got the sight impression and then the touch impression, but they're unified by the mind sense to say this is the same object. If you see what I mean, it creates a unitary world. Apart from, and that works for us to navigate the world, but what Buddhism says is it's not the ultimate truth. It's not how things really are. So let me talk about the next level down. The next level is a level of consciousness called the manas. The manas. And in the manas is where, in a way, the problems of our deluded perceptions begin. Because what the manas does is it sees this sort of constructed world in terms of a me, a real I in here, a subject, and a real world out there of objects. It creates this division, this duality between me and world. A real me in here and a real world out there. And according to Buddhism, that's a construct. It's a construction. Sometimes that construction you can start to see through. You can start to see through when sometimes you perceive something and you don't recognize it. And you think, the mind is constructing my world. I can remember being on I went on a long solitary retreat in 2018. And it was 6 months, and I've told this story before. I was meditating for a number of months. And then one day I was walking along, I was sort of doing some walking meditation along a track, it was up in the mountains in southern Spain, so I'm high up, There's nobody around. I haven't seen people for months, and I'm walking along this narrow little dirt track with a sort of drop on one side, and there are all these ant trails, these huge long ant trails. Ants are amazing things, aren't they? I don't know what they're doing. I mean, technically I know what they're doing, but why do they make such long trails? They're incredible things. And so I'm trying not to tread on the ants. So, I've got my eyes down. And then I look up, and there's this person there right in front of me. Just a few feet in front of me. Well, not one person, but about three. And immediately, I'm sort of a bit shocked, because, I thought I was on my own private patch of land, and I haven't seen people. And suddenly they were there, just a few feet in front of me, a few meters in front of me. Three of them, I think. I was like shocked, and sort of jumped back as well. And then I looked again, and they weren't people, they were ibex, which is a form of goat. They have horns, they're like deer, they look like deer. They're not people remotely like people. And, it took, normally that just doesn't happen, does it? But because I'd been meditating so long, and because ibex are not a familiar creature to me, I don't see them in Bethnal Green, I could suddenly see the structure of my mind sort of flailing around, trying to make sense of this image. So the eyes saw an image, but the mental sense didn't know what to make of it. It was probably going through its database of sense impressions, saying, so what is this right here? And the closest that it could come up to was people, which is really bizarre, really bizarre. So that gives you, when things like that happen, or you wake up in the night and, your dressing gown is like, a figure in your room or something like that. When things like that happen, misperceptions, you get a little clue into the constructed nature of our world, that our consciousness is constantly trying to make sense of the raw sense data is constantly being fitted into a pattern in order to, for us to navigate it. And part of the primary kind of part of that pattern is that there's a real objective, distinct world out there. And there's a real me in here, a real I, having the experience of the world out there. But Buddhism says that actually we don't know that. When you look within, you can't find the I. You can't really, where is the I that is having the experience of the world? What Buddhism says is it's not that there isn't a self, but there's not a fixed self. Do you know what I mean? There's not a constant, unchanging entity that has the changing life. It's not like there's a Jnanavaca who was 9 and existentially perturbed, and then there's a Jnanavaca now, and it's the same Jnanavaca, but my life has changed, or grown, or whatever. It's not that. There is just life happening. It's like there's a stream of life that I call me, but there's no static, real me. And correspondingly, when we look at the world, and I look at an ibex or a dog or a tree or the moon, what Buddhism's saying is that all you've really got are sense impressions, sense experiences, and then I'm constructing the objects out of that raw sense data. Another example on my retreat, I was outside my house, my hut. Well, it was a house, really. Hut sounds more romantic and Buddhist, but it was a house. two-story thing. I was on that sort of porch doing Qigong, and I'd just been reading D.H. Lawrence's poem Snake, and in front of me was this almond tree. There was all these almond trees and groves, and I was sort of longing to see a snake, and then suddenly the branch moved, one of the almond trees, and I thought, geez, that's a snake. And then I thought, no, don't be silly. That is your mind constructing snake because you've just been reading a poem about snake and you want to see a snake, and you see it's just the wind moving the branch. And so I carry on. Anyway, it was a snake, and because it moved again and then slithered, off the tree onto another branch, onto another tree. But in moments like that, you don't really know what's out there. All you've got is sense experience, sense impressions, and then guesswork. Now, part of that guesswork is that we assume that there are objects, real objects, that correspond to the sense experience. But Buddhism says, look, that's just an assumption. You don't really know what's really out there behind your images of it. We have appearances. So this snake turned out to be green. But green isn't out there, it's an experience, isn't it? A colour isn't out there, it's an experience that's somewhere happening. Where is it happening? Is it happening in here? Is it happening out there? We don't know. It's an experience that co-arises from the snake, whatever that is, and one's consciousness. Consciousness isn't just passively receiving the world, it's creating, co-creating the world. Because our eyes do some co-creating, consciousness does some co-creating. So we really don't know what's out there independent of us looking at it, or touching it, or tasting it, or whatever. It's a co-creation. We live in this kind of co-created world. And when we look within, we don't find a static person, an entity. It's much, much more mysterious. But this second level of consciousness, the manas, is deluded. It's deluded, and basically what it does is it assumes that there's a real static, fixed entity called I, called self, called me, called Jnanavaca. And it assumes that the world out there is not just appearances, but actual objects that are as they appear to be. Yeah? And that's a delusion. Buddhism says that's the fundamental delusion. And it gets, and it's not an idea. That's not an idea. It's not a cognitive delusion. It's a deep-rooted, pre-conscious, pre-sort of ordinary conscious delusion, and it's emotionally held and emotionally felt. I want to protect myself. I want to get what I want. It's really deeply held. It's like the survival instinct. And it's said that out of this delusion, there are a number of, ways of being. Kleshas, they're called. They're poisons, actually. They're not ways of being. They're poisons that are innate in this deluded manas, in this deluded level of consciousness. So there are 4 that are innate, and I'm just going to run through them. They're called the Atma Kleshas because they are, Atman means they're to do with this belief in a real me. And it's not one's fault, it's not my fault that I've got these poisons. That is part of the structure of the unenlightened mind. We're born with them. So the first one is Atma Sneha, which is self-infatuation. So not only do I think we've got that there's a me, I'm infatuated with me. Yeah. So I'm obsessed with me. So there's this world with its billions and billions of galaxies. I mean, possibly an infinite universe, boundless space and time, with who knows how many sentient beings in there. But no, there's one that's special, and in all of that vastness, there's me. Yeah, and I've been on this planet for 54 years. I sort of forget that, the solar system seems to have been about, I don't know how many billions of years old. Somebody will tell me. Yesterday I was reading about how the sun, our sun, will in 5 billion years, will die out and take the earth with it. But I don't normally worry about that because because there's me. And what am I going to have for my breakfast? And once again, there's no avocados for my smoothie, and such like, become much more important than the cosmos and all its beings. So self-infatuation. Yeah. Then there's atmamana, which is pride in oneself. So not only am I infatuated with myself, I'm sort of really proud of me. That can also be inverse pride. I really dislike myself because I'm the worst. So either I'm the best or I'm the worst, or I'm constantly trying to find where I am in the pecking order. That's all to do with pride, all to do with conceit. And it's innate, according to this model. We will do that. As soon as we've got a sense of self, as soon as we've constructed one, we'll be wanting to find out what level, where it is. Then there's Atma Moha. And in a way, this is ignorance about ourselves. This is ignorance about what it is to be human, what it is to be alive. So ignorance about the fact that we're mortal, for example, that we're going to die. We know that at one level, all of us, and yet we ignore it. And at a certain level, we're ignorant about it, most of the time, most of us. I'm not saying everybody, of course not. We're ignorant about our true existential situation. And then there's Atma Drushti, which is views about self. So not only don't we really know what's going on and who we are, Atma Drushti says we create views to tell us that we do know so we think we do know. So for example, scientific materialism is a drushti, is a view that says all we really are is a biological machine, a body, animated in some way. Well, maybe they don't say animated because that's more complicated. Anyway, we're just like a biological machine, and the death of the body is the death of everything. That's a view. So we have these views about self based on ignorance. So Buddhism's saying, look, we've got all these things wrong, and there are consequences to getting things wrong. But there is a deeper level of mind. There is a deeper level of mind still. This is the third sort of deepest level of mind. And it's this level where the freedom lies. At this level of mind, at this level of consciousness, it's called the Alaya. And in the Alaya, it's like consciousness is untrammeled. It's completely pristine. It arises fresh and beautiful and unbounded, moment to moment, and it's not deluded. There isn't the delusion. It's not personal either, because at this level of consciousness, there isn't yet the delusion of self. Hasn't yet arisen. This separation of self and world hasn't arisen. It's the most mysterious level to talk about. We don't have any real way of in ordinary life, grasping it. You might get a sense of it sometimes when you wake up and you are completely disoriented and consciousness seems to arise pure and you don't yet have a sense of me and world. There's just awareness. That might give you a bit of a hint. Meditative absorption can take you closer. Well, it can take you very, very close to this level of consciousness. And then wisdom, it's said that insight allows you to, well, it's not even that it allows you to experience this consciousness, it's more like the consciousness, the alaya, breaks through our normal deluded constructs. It breaks through. It keeps wanting to break through, actually. It keeps looking, I think, for ways of breaking through the delusion. But through Dharma practice, it's more likely to break through. And when it breaks through, well, it can be overwhelming. But if you have practiced in order for it to break through, it won't be overwhelming in a terrifying way. It'll be beautiful. It's like everything then comes alive. There's light and there's creativity and love. You still have your six senses operating, but it's like they're illumined now with a new light, which is also love. I had this experience once looking at a Turner painting in the Tate, Britain, when you could still go to galleries. And I looked at this Turner painting, and it was like it, I was going to say I fell into it, but that's not quite true. It was like it jumped out and hit me. It was like a bit of an assault. And I'd been meditating a lot. I'd been on solitary retreat and not long before. And it was like I knew that Turner was painting the world as light, and that was true. And it was the most peculiar experience. It was like I broke out into a fever, and I thought I was becoming ill, but I wasn't ill. I felt really well, but my physiologically there was some sort of energetic thing going on. So I started sweating. I became hot, and everything I looked at was made of light. It was like condensed light, but the light was also metta. And I walked out into, I was with Akasha Mitra, a friend of mine, and we walked out and into onto the south bank and you know, walking along the river. And everybody I saw, it was like they were sort of constellations of light, consolidations of light, concentrations of light that was also of the nature of metta. Anyway, it didn't last. Of course, it didn't last. And, you know, I then come back down to my normal self. But it's like in those moments, it was more than a moment, it lasted a couple of hours. It's like something of the true nature of consciousness, this deepest nature of consciousness, breaks through. And when it does, you experience things like everything looking beautiful, that you experience a connection with everybody and everything, that you're not separate. Love is the natural force of the world, and everything is exquisitely sort of in its place. There's a certain brightness to life. I in the community on Saturday night we were watching Tom Ford's wonderful film A Single Man. Do watch A Single Man, based on a Christopher Isherwood novel about a man who is bereaved and set in 1962. And I won't give it away too much because I always get told off by my community for giving away the endings. But anyway, he's bereaved. He's gay, and his lover has died, and he's grieving. particularly, the point that he's gay seems important, particularly because it isolates him, because it's illegal. So he can't even grieve openly. And his life has sort of lost meaning. But throughout this film, what he keeps experiencing is moments of connection and moments of beauty. And towards the end of the film, he says to another character, he says that that's what he's lived for throughout his life. There have been these heightened moments where he's really connected with another human being. Later on, he talks about these moments of beauty, and he says that he's based his life, they've been fleeting, but they've been enough to base his life upon. That's this deepest level of consciousness breaking through. And we're going to break for tea in a moment, but I want to come back after tea and say a little bit more about how we encourage that breakthrough of this deepest level of consciousness of the Alaya, how we encourage it so that we don't have to just wait for moments of grace to descend upon us, but that we can work systematically to allow more and more moments of breaking through of the truth, how that can then guide us in our life, and how ultimately there's a complete turning around in it's said in the deepest seat of consciousness, and what that might look like. So yeah, this deepest level of consciousness, this truest level of consciousness, is not dualistic. So you can't say that it's mine, even though it's found by looking inward. It's not in time and space. So within doesn't really make sense. And it's not dualistic. It's like time and space and this dualistic world of objects and people and selves is within the Alaya. It's like it merges from the Alaya. That's what I mean. I'm talking in terms of as if, because there's no other way of talking. But it's not me. It's not mine. It's not dualistic in that way. And it's said to be luminous. It's said to be, that's one way of describing it. It's also said to be bliss, and untrammeled, pristine, free, unbounded. At the moment of death, it's said that we get a glimpse of this luminous consciousness. It flashes forth at the moment of death of the body. And if we can recognize it as our truest, deepest nature, then it's said that moment of death is an opportunity for liberation, for enlightenment. But mostly, the fact that I'm here and you're watching at home means that we didn't recognize it last time. Because it's very, very hard to recognize. And what's likely to happen, unless we've done lots of practice and have had enough sufficient recognition of this deepest level of consciousness, what's likely to happen is that we're overwhelmed. At the moment of death, we're overwhelmed, we're disoriented, we've lost all our bearings. This luminous consciousness flashes before us, outside of time and space. We can't handle it, and if we can't handle it, we shrink back from it. We shrink back, and eventually, according to the Tibetan tradition, we find security in the known, which is another embodied form. But anyway, the moment of death is said to offer a tiny opportunity, which most of us we're not able to handle. So how do we prepare for that moment of death? And how do we don't even have to wait for death, actually, for this deepest level of consciousness to begin to emerge? Well, you practice, first of all, we practice ethics. We practice Sila. In our actions, in this dualistic world of me and you, in that dualistic framework of me and you, What we try and do as Dharma practitioners is not act so self-centeredly, to not go with that self-infatuation, not act from it. We try and act more generously, more kindly, more empathically, we foster connection and love. What that does is it loosens that sense of self, which is a sort of like a tight knot. It starts to loosen it. We also train ourselves to appreciate the world as beautiful. I mean, look for beauty. And not everything immediately appears beautiful, perhaps. But look with the eyes of an artist. A great artist can make ordinary things look beautiful. I can remember going to see, with my Trabanda, we went to Aix-en-Provence and visited Cézanne's studio. And he, in that studio, where he painted so many of his paintings, all the still lives were probably painted in that studio. And in the studio, there's all the objects of his still lives, beautifully sort of, the wine bottle, the kind of jar, even the fruit, the sort of jugs and fruits, and anyway, it's all there. And then they had images, video images of his paintings, so you could see the paintings and you could see the objects that he'd painted. And frankly, the objects that he'd painted were stuff that you wouldn't pick up in a bric-a-brac shop. I mean, you just wouldn't give it a second glance. An empty wine bottle, a sort of jug with a cane covering. You wouldn't bother even looking at it. Then you look at what he painted from it, and they appear monumental. They appear like they're universal, shining objects that point to truth. That they're the most beautiful things. The fruits, the apples, they're the most exquisite things in his paintings. He's looking with the eyes of beauty, and then through his exquisite skill, being able to paint what he sees. Well, I'm never going to be a painter, but I can learn to look more with the eyes of beauty. And we can do that, not just through our sort of everyday, ordinary life. We can do it through meditation as well. Well, one of the things that meditation does is it softens this dualistic sense of separateness even more. We cultivate metta, we cultivate awareness, and we learn to see the world as more beautiful. That's what happens, doesn't it, when you come out of a really good meditation? Ordinary things shine with an inner sort of beauty that is really there, but sort of ungraspable. That's pointing to something more true. So ethics is the foundation for then meditation. Sila is the foundation for samadhi. And in samadhi, we work more directly with the mind, using the mind, works more directly with the mind to soften, make consciousness more malleable, more creative, soften these bonds of delusion. And then finally, the third stage of the path is pranya, or wisdom. So on the basis of a mind that's been made receptive, malleable, creative, pliable, permeated with love, with metta and awareness, on that basis, we then try and look at the structure of consciousness, look at the structure of experience. And if we do that, if we habituate ourselves to wisdom practice, then what's more likely to happen is that we'll get moments of this deepest level of consciousness breaking through all the deluded constructions. And that will happen more and more and more as we practice Sila, Samadhi, Pranya, ethics, meditation, wisdom. It starts to happen. First of all, there'll be like flashes of lightning. Then the flashes of lightning become more and more frequent. And then finally, what we're aiming for is constant illumination, where this deepest level of mind has not just broken through in a flash, but what's said to happen is that the whole structure of our consciousness turns around, and what was deepest becomes, as it were, turns inside out and becomes manifest in our lives all the time. And then that we've reached the furthest that Buddhism can talk about. That is the enlightened mind. It doesn't end there. The creativity, the love, the flowing unfoldment doesn't end, but there's no further we can talk about. We've transcended all categories. We can point to images, and one image that the tradition points to is the mandala of the 5 Buddhas. And you have Akshobhya, and his wisdom is said to be the mirror-like wisdom. What that's saying is that, just as a mirror just reflects whatever's in front of it without bias, it's that we will see now the world just as it is, without any grasping or aversion. There'll be no pulling or pushing. There's no personal bias. There's no investment. We just see things as they are. That's Akshobhya's wisdom. Then you've got Ratnasambhava, this gold and yellow Buddha, and his wisdom is the wisdom of equality, and it's said that you see his wisdom. When you see with his wisdom, everything is equally beautiful. I mean, everything shines. Everything is this illumined light and love made manifest. Then there's Amitabha's wisdom. Amitabha, the red Buddha of love, and the Buddha of the West. It's the Buddha figure behind me is Amitabha. His wisdom is the wisdom of discrimination, which sees everything in their uniqueness. Every thing is a unique coming together of conditions that can never be repeated. In everything, moment to moment, is afresh, new, unique, and unrepeatable. And then you've got Amoda Siddhi's wisdom, and Amoda Siddhi, the Buddha of the North, the green Buddha of the North, his wisdom is in a way, it's creativity in action. So it's engagement with the world through creativity and through compassion. And then finally, in the center of the mandala, you have Varochana. And Varochana, the white, the illuminator as he's called, and his wisdom is the wisdom of the Dharma Dhatu, which is the wisdom that sees truth everywhere, in everything, all the time. And when we have experienced that for ourselves, we'll have reached the end of the quest that Buddhism lays before us. It won't be the end of everything, because consciousness keeps unfolding. There is no end. The very notion of end belongs to the notion of time, and we'll have stepped beyond all such notions whatsoever. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.